Hearing from Maine leaders tonight who are now pushing back against the president's executive order, trying to change the way now that the nation votes. His new executive order calls on Homeland Security to create a list of verified voters in each state, with the Postal Service then only allowing mail-in ballots to be sent to the voters who are on that list. He also wants unique barcodes to track the envelopes. President Trump says this is about stopping what he claims is widespread cheating by Democrats. But state election officials, like Maine Secretary Shenna Bellows, they say this is blatantly unconstitutional. Senator Susan Collins, a Republican, agrees that elections should be left to the states.
This is unconstitutional. Remember, the founders 250 years ago, when they declared independence, and then when they drafted the Constitution, they put the states in charge of elections because they wanted to avoid tyranny. And the president is not in charge of elections, the states are.
All right, crew. Adam speaking time to get loud. Maine is becoming a nightmare for Trump and Republicans, with independent voters turning sharply Democratic as energized organizing and progressive populism gain traction. The state could flip the Senate and become a test case for whether Trump's political brand is collapsing even in historically purple territory. The decision from Maine Secretary of State to remove Donald Trump from the Republican primary ballot is drawing harsh criticism and calls for an appeal from Republican leaders who are absolutely furious about what they see as an unprecedented overreach. In statements to the Portland Press-Herald, the GOP leader in the Maine House called it a sham decision and warned it will not stand legal scrutiny. The state's Republican Senate leader says the decision undermines democracy, and Maine voters deserve a primary process that allows for each party to decide its own candidates without interference from state officials. The Maine GOP has said it will appeal that decision immediately and forcefully. Here is what the party chairman told CNN, and his words revealed just how angry Republicans are about this development.
Today, we are awaiting two major appeals from Donald Trump's lawyers that could have major consequences for the 2024 election. Trump is fighting a pair of historic decisions that disqualify him from primary ballots in Colorado and Maine. They hinge on the 14th Amendment's so-called insurrectionist ban. It's a constitutional gray area that's being tested in unprecedented fashion right now, and that's why it seems these cases are destined for the Supreme Court. We want to discuss with Maine Republican Party Chair Joel Stetkes. Joel, thank you so much for sharing part of your afternoon with us. So the Maine Republican Party, we understand, has been working on an appeal. When are you anticipating you will file it, or are you coordinating with the Trump team on timing?
So what we have been doing since prior to the announcement by Secretary of State Bellows is working with multiple groups of lawyers on our options and what tools we have at our disposal.
He said she has kicked a serious hornet's nest. He said he has heard just in the last couple hours from so many independents, Democrats and Republicans alike, who are furious about this decision. Not because they support Trump, but because they believe this is about constitutional rights and the ability of the American people to elect into leadership the people that they choose. Maine Secretary of State Shenna Bellows made a ruling that absolutely stunned Republicans and sent shockwaves through the political establishment. She said President Trump is disqualified from Maine's Republican presidential primary ballot. She cited Section 3 of the 14th Amendment and his documented role in the January 6th insurrection as the basis for her decision. Trump's campaign immediately called it theft of an election and appealed in court. But here is what is important about that decision. Here is what shows you how much things have shifted in American politics. A state official, a Secretary of State in a state where President Trump got votes in the past, ruled him ineligible for the ballot based on the 14th Amendment.
Maine is now the second state to rule former President Donald Trump cannot appear on its primary ballot, citing the 14th Amendment's clause against insurrectionists holding office. Trump's legal team says they plan to appeal this ruling, his campaign calling Maine Secretary of State who made this decision a, quote, hyper-partisan Biden-supporting Democrat. Colorado's Supreme Court also ruled against the former president's eligibility just last week, but he's back on the ballot for now as this appeal plays out. Meanwhile, other states, including California, have rejected efforts to take Trump off the ballot.
That is unprecedented in modern times. That is something that basically never happens. And that is just the beginning of what is happening in Maine. Because while all that ballot fight stuff was happening, Democrats were organizing like crazy on the ground. More than 1,000 Democrats, we are talking well over 1,000, packed into Portland for the state convention. These were not small meetings or modest turnouts. These were huge convention halls filled with energized Democrats who showed up ready to work and organize. These were people who came to fight for their vision of America, and they are all fired up about democracy and reproductive rights, and making absolutely sure that President Trump does not get another term in office. The energy was remarkable, according to people who were there. Governor Janet Mills was originally supposed to run for Senate against Republican Susan Collins, but she suspended that campaign recently, which completely reshuffled the entire race and created new opportunities for different candidates to step up.
It's day 2 of the Maine Democratic State Convention. The event brought hundreds of members of the party to Thompson's Point ahead of the 2026 election. CBS 13's Allison LaPierre spoke to some candidates in the race for governor and asked about the issues most pressing to them.
Every 2 years, Maine state Democrats gather for the Democratic State Convention.
We have over 1,000 delegates here for our second day of excitement.
It's a weekend of speeches, workshops, trainings, and panels to educate and unite members of the party.
So we were really giving all of our base the hard tools that we need to win this cycle across the ballot.
Democratic House Speaker Ryan Fecteau was among those who addressed the crowd, speaking on a range of topics.
With your help, we are going to grow our House majority in 2026.
And now you have got progressive candidates like Graham Plattner running against Collins and drawing significant crowds with really compelling populist messaging about the economy and standing up against Trump's agenda. Representative Ro Khanna, who is a prominent progressive voice in Congress, is flying into Maine to headline a major Get Out the Vote rally in Bar Harbor. He is talking about building a modern New Deal coalition. He is talking about flipping Maine seats from red to blue. He is talking about creating economic opportunities for working people. That is what is happening on the Democratic side right now. It is energetic and organized and focused. On the Republican side, you have got Susan Collins running what NPR is calling one of the toughest campaigns of her career. She is facing a real challenge that she did not expect to face. Trump's immigration crackdown is the biggest problem. Trump's enforcement policies are a huge problem. Trump's harsh rhetoric on immigration is creating issues for Republicans statewide. NPR reports that these policies and this rhetoric are directly hurting Collins' re-election chances with independents and moderate Democrats. Trump's approach to immigration is making it really hard for Collins to appeal to the middle because independents do not like the hardline approach. Maine's electorate has almost 1/3 of voters who are registered as independent. That is huge. That is an absolutely massive block of voters who do not have a party allegiance. They do not wear a team jersey. They make decisions based on what they think is best. And those independents are drifting toward Democrats right now because they are frustrated with Trump's policies and his rhetoric. They do not like where he is taking the country. They do not like the constant chaos. They do not like the culture war stuff that dominates Republican messaging. So what you are looking at in Maine is basically the perfect storm for Republicans. Everything is going wrong at the same time. You have got a Democratic Party that is unified and energized and organizing on the ground in ways that are actually visible and impressive. You have got a Republican Party where the presidential nominee got kicked off the ballot entirely. You have got a Republican senator whose re-election is in serious jeopardy because of Trump's policies and Trump's popularity problems. You have got independent voters moving away from Republicans and toward Democrats because they see Democrats as offering better solutions. And you have got Trump's approval numbers in the tank nationally. This is not a regional problem that affects just one area. This is a national problem for Republicans. Maine just happens to be the place where it is most visible right now. This is where you can see it playing out in real time. You can see the mechanics of how Trump's unpopularity is dragging down Republicans everywhere. Governor Janet Mills and other Maine Democratic leaders have been holding rallies in cities like Brunswick and other towns across the state. They are warning that another Trump presidency would threaten democracy itself. They are talking about reproductive rights and how another Trump term could further restrict abortion access. They are talking about school funding and how Trump's policies would hurt Maine students. They are talking about Trump trying to expand presidential power in ways that would be dangerous for democracy. They are explicitly tying all of this to Project 2025, which is Trump's detailed, comprehensive second-term agenda. Democrats in Maine are not just running against President Trump as a person, they are running against the entire Trump agenda and the chaos and harm that comes with it. They are making the election a referendum on democracy itself, and whether America continues as a constitutional republic or moves in a more authoritarian direction. Let us dig deeper into why Maine is such a big deal right now and why this story matters so much for the whole country and the entire political landscape. Because on the surface, you might think Maine is just a small state in the Northeast that does not really matter much. But Maine is actually way more important than that in multiple ways. Maine has a unique electoral system where it splits its electoral college votes by congressional district. That means Maine does not have to give all its electoral votes to one candidate. Maine can actually split its votes between different candidates depending on who wins each congressional district. That makes Maine important in presidential elections because you are not guaranteed all or nothing. You could theoretically win Maine overall, but lose one congressional district. That makes Maine important in close presidential elections. And on top of that electoral importance, you have got a Senate race that could flip the balance of power in the Senate entirely. Susan Collins has been a senator since 1997. She has been re-elected multiple times. She is one of the few remaining moderate Republicans in the Senate, and her re-election is now in serious jeopardy. If Collins loses her seat in Maine, that is a pickup for Democrats. That changes the Senate math entirely. That is one seat closer to Democrats flipping control of the Senate. We are not talking about a state that does not matter. We are talking about a state that could genuinely reshape control of Congress and the direction of the country for years to come. Now, let us talk about what is driving this collapse for Republicans in Maine, and why independents in the state are moving toward Democrats in such significant numbers. The biggest issue right now is Trump's immigration crackdown and his harsh enforcement policies. NPR has reported extensively on this and documented how Trump's immigration policies are reshaping Maine politics. Trump's immigration enforcement is directly hurting Republican chances in the state across the board. Trump has been very aggressive on immigration throughout his presidency. He has talked about mass deportations. He has talked about separating families at the border. He has talked about building walls and cracking down on what he calls illegal immigration. He has talked about immigration enforcement in the most hardline terms possible. In Maine, which is a state with real immigrant communities and real concern for immigrant families and real humanitarian values, that is playing really badly. That is driving voters away from Republicans. That is making it harder for Republican candidates to appeal to the middle. Independents in Maine care about immigration as a policy issue, but they also care about humanity and treating people with dignity. They care about whether families get ripped apart. They care about whether people are treated with basic decency. Trump's hardline rhetoric on immigration is making Susan Collins' job incredibly hard because she is trying to appeal to independents and moderate voters. She is constantly having to distance herself from Trump's most extreme positions on immigration. She cannot fully reject Trump because that alienates Republican voters, but she cannot fully embrace Trump because that drives away independents. She is stuck in the middle trying to thread a needle that might not be threadable. It is not just immigration policy that is driving Republicans crazy in Maine. Trump is also pushing something he calls a war on fraud. Specifically, his administration is talking very aggressively about cracking down on what they claim is Medicaid fraud and waste. Maine GOP leaders are trying to spin this as a positive thing. They are saying Trump is fighting waste and abuse in government. They are saying Trump is protecting Maine taxpayers from fraud. They are saying Trump is trying to make sure government money goes where it is supposed to go. But Democrats are saying something very different about this war on fraud. Democrats are saying that Trump's war on fraud is really just about partisan warfare and blame. It is about blaming Democrats and the Biden administration for problems that happened in the past. It is not actually about fixing anything. It is not about solutions. It is about creating division and anger and using government power as a weapon against political opponents. That message is resonating with Maine voters because Maine voters are tired of the constant partisan fighting and blame. They want actual solutions to real problems. They want politicians who are going to improve people's lives and make government work better. They do not want endless blame and division and culture war rhetoric. They want pragmatism. Then, on top of all that, you have got serious economic frustration that is hitting Maine hard and affecting how people vote. Costs are going up consistently. Wages are not keeping pace with inflation. People are struggling to afford rent. People are struggling to afford healthcare. People are worried about their futures and their kids' futures. President Trump ran on the promise of bringing back manufacturing and creating good jobs and improving the economy. But the reality is that Maine voters are still feeling financial pressure and economic anxiety. They still cannot afford things. They still see their economic situation getting worse. Democrats are stepping into that gap with a populist economic message that appeals to working people. Graham Plattner is running for Senate, and he is talking about an economic agenda that focuses directly on helping working people and lifting them up. He is talking about wages and job creation and making sure working people can afford to live in Maine without working 3 jobs. That message is drawing big crowds because Maine voters are hungry for that kind of positive economic vision. They are tired of the chaos and the culture war stuff that dominates Republican messaging. They want to hear about how a politician is going to help them put food on the table and pay their rent and send their kids to college. You have got this collision happening in Maine between Trump fatigue and Democratic organizing and economic frustration, all coming together at the exact same time. The Democrats are ready for it because they have been preparing and organizing. They packed that convention in Portland with over 1,000 activists. That is huge. That is not normal for state conventions. Conventions usually do not get that many people. That shows real grassroots energy. That shows real motivation and excitement. Conventions with that kind of attendance show that people actually care and want to be involved. Democrats are knocking on doors throughout Maine. They are making phone calls to voters. They are talking to people about why they should support Democratic candidates. They are explaining why they think President Trump is bad for the country. They are explaining why they think another Trump presidency would threaten democracy and rights and the economy. Importantly, they are offering a positive alternative vision. They are offering an economic vision for Maine. They are offering protection for reproductive rights. They are offering a vision of a country where democracy and the Constitution matter and where government actually works to help people. That is hitting at a moment when President Trump's approval ratings are really bad across the country. His net approval nationally is negative 15%. That is a huge deficit. That is something that is very hard to come back from. That is a number that suggests fundamental problems with how people see Trump. He is negative in 39 states. That is 39 out of 50 states where Trump's approval is underwater. That includes swing states that are critical for Republicans. That includes places like Pennsylvania and Arizona, and Georgia, and Michigan, and Wisconsin. Those are states that Trump won in 2020 or came very close, but he is now negative in them. He is losing ground. He is unpopular. Maine is part of that broader pattern of Trump fatigue spreading across the country. People are tired of Trump. People are tired of the chaos and the drama and the constant fighting and the culture war stuff. People are tired of the unpredictability and the norm breaking and the chaos. They are ready to try something different. Democrats are offering that something different. They are offering an alternative vision of government that is based on solving problems instead of creating conflict. What is really significant about what is happening in Maine is that it is happening in a state with a huge independent voting bloc that actually decides elections. Independents are generally people who are more pragmatic and less ideologically rigid than people who are locked into a party. Independents care about whether government is actually working and helping their lives. They care about whether they can afford to live. They care about jobs and economy and healthcare and education. When independents get frustrated with one party, they tend to swing the other direction pretty decisively. They do not have party loyalty to hold them back. If Maine independents are moving toward Democrats, that is a huge warning sign for Republicans. That means Republicans are losing the middle. They are losing the people in the middle who are not locked into partisan ideology. That is a real problem for a political party, because independents often decide elections. Independents are swing voters. If you lose independent voters, you lose elections. Maine Democrats are also being very smart and strategic about their messaging and how they are communicating with voters. They are not just attacking Trump. They are talking about what they are for. They are talking about protecting democracy and the rule of law. They are talking about protecting abortion rights, which is a huge issue for Maine voters, especially after the Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. They are talking about school funding and education, which matters to Maine families who care about their kids. They are talking about protecting Social Security and Medicare, which matters to older Maine voters who have paid into these programs their whole lives. Democrats are making a very comprehensive case that they are better for Maine voters across a whole range of issues that matter to people's actual lives. They are tying President Trump to all of the things that Maine voters do not want. They are saying Trump threatens democracy. Trump threatens your reproductive rights. Trump threatens your Social Security. Trump's chaos does not fix the economy. Trump does not have solutions to the problems that actually matter to you and your family. Let us break down what is actually happening here and what it means for Maine and for the country. The first thing to understand is that Maine is not supposed to be competitive for Democrats right now. Maine is a purple state traditionally. It has independents. It has conservative areas, especially up north in rural Maine. Susan Collins is a longtime senator who has been winning re-election regularly. She is popular among some voters. But President Trump has changed the dynamic so much that even a state like Maine, where Republicans have traditionally been competitive, is now in serious danger for Republicans. That is the first major story here, and it is really important. Maine is becoming a Democratic-leaning state, at least in this election cycle because of President Trump. Trump is toxic with Maine voters, and that is dragging down Susan Collins, even though she has tried very hard to distance herself from him and create space between her and Trump's more extreme positions. Democrats are actually organized and energized in ways that you can see playing out. Over 1,000 people at a state convention is not normal. That is what you get when people are fired up and motivated to actually do work. That is what you get when people believe in something and want to work hard for it and are willing to show up and put in effort. Democrats in Maine clearly believe that stopping Trump and protecting democracy is worth getting out and organizing for in a serious way. They are knocking on doors in neighborhoods. They are making phone calls to voters. They are doing the actual work of politics that wins elections. Meanwhile, Republicans in Maine are dealing with President Trump getting kicked off the ballot and trying to figure out how to appeal to independents when their party is moving in directions that are opposite to where independents want to go. That is a real organizational problem. That is a structural disadvantage. One party has energy and organization, and the other does not. Independents in Maine have options now, and they are choosing Democrats. Independents used to be the swing voters who could go either way depending on circumstances and who was running. But right now, in Maine, they have clear reasons to vote Democratic. Trump's immigration policies are too hardline and too harsh. The Republican Party is too chaotic and unpredictable. President Trump is unpopular and dragging down Republican candidates. The Democratic Party is offering concrete solutions to economic problems that matter to working people. Independents are making a choice, and that choice is increasingly to move toward Democrats. That is potentially a permanent realignment in a state that used to be swing territory. If independents in Maine decide that the Democratic Party better represents their values and their interests and will actually help them, they can stay Democratic for a generation. That would reshape Maine politics completely and make it solidly blue instead of purple. This is part of a broader national trend of Trump fatigue and GOP struggles and Republican collapse in places where Trump is unpopular. Maine is not an isolated case that is unique. There are analyses that show Republicans are suffering what analysts call dire results in multiple states because of cost of living frustration and Trump fatigue. Trump's approval is negative in 39 states. That is almost 80% of all states where Trump is underwater. That suggests a real national problem for Republicans and a real ceiling on Trump's ability to win elections. Maine is just a place where it is most visible because you can see it playing out in real time. You can see the Democratic convention happening. You can see the Senate race becoming competitive. You can see independents moving away from Republicans. It is all happening right in front of you in Maine, and you can watch it unfold. The stakes are actually pretty high here for the entire country. If Republicans lose Maine in the Senate race, that is a Senate pickup for Democrats. That changes the math for Senate control. If President Trump continues to be unpopular in Maine and other similar states, that affects the House races too. Democrats could pick up multiple seats in House races. If Trump's approval keeps tanking nationally, that could affect the upcoming elections in ways that reshape Congress entirely and give Democrats more power and more ability to block Trump's agenda. Maine might be a small state with not that many people, but the trends it is showing could have huge consequences for the whole country. Democrats are making this election about democracy and the Constitution and protecting rights and freedoms. That is a powerful frame for an election. When you make an election about abstract principles like that instead of just about policy disagreements, it tends to motivate voters more. It makes people feel like something important is at stake. It makes people feel like they have to vote because democracy depends on it. Maine voters clearly feel like democracy is important. They feel like the Constitution matters. They care about protecting abortion rights. When Democrats make the election about protecting democracy and protecting rights, Maine voters respond to that message. That is a winning message right now. Economic populism and focusing on helping working people. Graham Plattner is running for Senate on an economic message that focuses on helping working people and lifting them up. That is resonating with voters because Maine voters are struggling economically. Costs are up, wages are not keeping pace. People are worried about affording rent and food and healthcare and college for their kids. When a politician comes along and says, I have an economic plan to help working people and make their lives better, that appeals to voters. That appeals to independents who are pragmatic and care about whether government actually helps their lives. Democrats in Maine are smart to emphasize their economic message alongside their message about protecting democracy. Susan Collins's re-election, which used to look safe, is now genuinely in doubt and competitive. Collins used to be a safe senator that people assumed would keep getting re-elected. But President Trump has made it much harder for her to appeal to independents. She is trying to distance herself from Trump, but she is also a Republican, and she votes with Republicans on a lot of issues. She is in a tough spot. She cannot fully reject Trump without alienating Republican voters who might primary her or challenge her. But she cannot fully embrace Trump without alienating independent voters who are moving away from Republicans. Right now, independents matter more than they used to in Maine because they are willing to move toward Democrats, and they are actually doing it. Collins is caught in the middle, and that is making her race much more competitive than it would normally be. Maine is a test case for Trump's vulnerability in purple states. If he's losing independents there, similar shifts could hit Pennsylvania, Michigan, and other swing states. Meanwhile, Democrats are building the kind of ground organization that wins elections, while Republicans are mired in chaos, making the trend a warning for the GOP nationally.